Flat, written by Annie Davis. Bosco the cow dog was so upset. He just kept barking at the front door. Mr. Arthur went to the door to see why Bosco was barking so loudly. As he opened the door, Bosco tugged at his leg. He quickly yelled to Miss Arthur, "Something is wrong with the twins! Hurry, quick!" Mr. and Mrs. Arthur both followed Bosco to the big red barn. They quickly found Aggie and Annie twins lying on the ground, flat as pancakes. "Oh, my goodness!" cried Mrs. Arthur. "Gosh!" said Mr. Arthur. Slowly Aggie and Annie started to stand up. Annie shouted, "The barn door flew past me and slammed Aggie behind the door. When I went to check on him, a cold, hard wind whipped the door again and smashed me on the side of the barn." The twins' mother and father, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur, couldn't believe their eyes. They decided to ask Dr. Gore, the veterinarian, to look at the children before she checked on Molly, the black cow. Molly's belly was huge, they thought. She might be having twins. While waiting for Dr. G, Aggie and Annie started the chores in the barn. Annie started running clean water for all the animals. Aggie gathered fresh hay and nutritious feed for Molly. Across the barn, Pearl the pig oinked, snorted, and squealed. She didn't want anyone to forget her. She was loud every morning. This morning she was super excited because she knew Aggie and Annie looked so different. She knew they were flat. "Good morning, Arthur family," greeted Dr. G. "What in the world happened to you kids?" Dr. G asked. "Well, Dr. G, we were checking on Molly this morning and the door smashed me. Then the door smashed Annie and now we're both flat," explained Aggie. Miss Arthur asked Dr. G if she would mind checking Aggie and Annie out before she looked at Molly. "Sure," Dr. G agreed, "but I've never seen anything like this before." Dr. G pulled out her measuring tape. Aggie and Annie were both about 4 feet tall and 1 inch wide. She listened to both their hearts. She looked in Aggie's ears, nose, and throat, and she checked his reflexes on his legs and arms. Finally, Dr. G reported both Aggie and Annie seemed fine. They were just flat. Dr. G started toward Molly to check on her. After examining Molly, Dr. G confirmed, "Molly will have twins." Once the twins arrived at school, their teacher, Miss Wheatley, was shocked at how flat they were. Everyone at school was very concerned. Being flat didn't slow them down. In fact, it made school even more fun. When the key to the locked greenhouse door went missing, Aggie slid through the door frame and unlocked the door. Everyone cheered, "Flat Aggie! Flat Aggie! Flat Aggie saved the day!" Next, the twins wanted to travel to Aunt Abby's house in Wyoming for their cousin Jake's birthday party. Since they were so flat, Mr. and Mrs. Arthur decided to mail them. Miss Arthur filled a large envelope with 2 crackers, 2 small crisp pieces of bacon, 2 square pieces of yellow cheese, and 2 beef sticks. Next, Aggie and Annie both slid into the envelope. Miss Arthur sealed the envelope and carefully dropped it in the mailbox. The next day, the phone rang. "Hey, Mom, we made it!" Aggie shouted from the other end. "Hi, Mom," Annie said. "It was so cool, we can travel anywhere now," Annie exclaimed. Aggie and Annie had a blast at Jake's party. When one kid wished Jake had a trampoline to play on, Aggie and Annie both climbed on top of the fence and stretched out. Aggie and Annie instantly became a trampoline. That evening, Aunt Abby's neighbor, Mr. Smith, called to report someone stole cattle from him the night before. He said, "The rustlers didn't get all the cows. They might try to steal the rest of them tonight. I just don't know how to catch the rustlers." Luckily, Aggie and Annie had an idea. "All I need is glue, 2 cameras, 2 flashlights, and a drone. We can find out where all your cows are going and catch the bad guys," said Aggie. That night, Mr. Smith put the cameras on 2 headbands for the twins to wear. Then he glued one of Aggie's shoes to the back of his favorite cow, Jessie. Annie jumped on the drone and flew herself to the top of the electric pole to wait for the rustlers to come back to steal cattle. Then Mr. Smith made sure they were both safe. Aggie and Annie waited patiently. Around 11:30 p.m., headlights came down the dirt road. Sure enough, it was a big truck and trailer. They were coming to load the rest of the cows. Annie waited quietly from the top of the electric pole, while Aggie was stuck to Jessie. The rustlers didn't even notice the twins. As soon as the rustlers stopped to unload the stolen cattle, the sheriff and his deputies were there to meet them and take them to jail. Aunt Abby and Jake looked on as Mr. Smith and Sheriff McKee shook hands with Aggie and Annie. "Thank you for helping catch those rustlers," said Mr. Smith. "Yes," said Sheriff McKee, "we would still be looking for those cattle if you hadn't helped." Miss Arthur called to tell the twins that Molly would have her babies any minute. They had to get home and fast. Aunt Abby had an idea of emailing Aggie and Annie home. She scanned Aggie and Annie on the computer. Next, Aunt Abby drafted an email. Miss Arthur's computer dinged with an email. She opened the email and clicked on the attachment, and instantly Aggie and Annie were there. She clicked print. Aggie and Annie both printed from the printer and stepped off the paper. Aunt Abby's idea worked. They were home in a flash. They both ran quickly out to the barn to check on Molly. She had just given birth to the twin calves and was cleaning them up. Aggie and Annie were so excited. Aggie and Annie's flat adventures had been so fun, but they were missing how things used to be. Aggie shared, "I just really want to be a kid again. I am feeling sad. I want to play on the playground at school with my friends. It's been really neat to be flat. I just want to play with my friends again." Aggie and Annie tried to think of a way to become a normal size again and not flat. "Maybe the hairdryer will work," suggested Aggie. Annie thought for a minute. "No, that won't work. We need a different idea," said Annie. Annie went to the barn to get the air tank by the flat tractor tire to see if that would work. She put her lips around the hose and turned on the air. When that happened, Annie flew across the barn and the hose went crazy like a snake. That idea didn't work. The air was way too fast. Aggie grabbed the leaf blower and directed, "Let's try this, Annie." Aggie stretched his flat lips around the leaf blower and Annie turned it on. Aggie's leg slowly started to inflate. His leg was huge, but the rest of his body was still flat. Annie told Aggie to shake his leg to see if the air would move. Aggie shook his leg like a dog, and the other leg inflated. Aggie put his mouth on the leaf blower again. He inflated the rest of the way. "Annie, it's your turn," coaxed Aggie. Annie carefully put her mouth on the leaf blower. In just a minute, Annie was inflated just like a balloon. Aggie and Annie were so excited to be back like regular kids again. The next morning, Aggie and Annie both went to check on the animals in the barn. The wind was cold and blowing again. Annie opened the barn door quickly, and it flew open. Aggie was behind the door. The end.